All right, friends, I have 3 cultural touchstones for you, and the first one today comes through Clark Kent. In this passage, we have Jesus incognito as his risen self, and we are told that his disciples are not able to see Jesus on the road, and they can't tell that it is their beloved teacher. Sure, maybe it's dark, maybe it's overcast, maybe there's some kind of veil involved. And is his body altered, we wonder? Is it dust or grief in their eyes? Have they, like Paul, in some way been blinded by a light? It reminds us of the Clark Kent effect. You know how in the comic books and movies, Clark Kent is suited, newspaper employee, dashing glasses, junior to Lois Lane working for the Daily Planet on the left. But something dramatic happens into the world, and what happens? A transformation occurs, and there is a need for a hero, and rising to the occasion is the costumed man on the right. Now, you will notice, certainly maybe there's a camera angle involved, there's obviously the wardrobe change, but how was it that this is how this proceeded each and every episode or each and every movie we see? The irony is always that those around him can't see him, but we know, we're in on the irony as the audience, that we know it's Clark Kent is Superman. That's right, Clark Kent. I'm sorry for those who didn't know. Clark Kent is Superman and has been the whole time, right? But as we come to this scripture and the Clark Kent effect, we don't know exactly what element is keeping the recognition from happening, but the tomb is not a toll booth, right? At this point in Jesus' journey, although some gospel stories early on had said, don't tell anyone that it's him who's come, right now, in the risenness of Jesus, we get the sense that everybody needs to know. Everybody needs to know that on the other side of the tomb, there's actually this risen one who has come, and he can do the most good when he is recognized and people understand what has happened. But it takes some time. Here are the disciples, and they're trying to make their way home. On this road, there is this tough and familiar stretch, and we hear Jesus ambling up next to them, perhaps startling them in some way, but rewarming them up to the idea of his risen self, because it seems like they have likely given up on all the predictions he's made throughout his ministry. Just as the messengers in our story last week reminded Joanna, Mary, and Mary Magdalene about the legacy of Jesus when they find the empty tomb, now it is Jesus' turn himself to get in on the recalling, and I think he has a little fun with it, complete with a walking history lesson. And throughout this time, they do not recognize him, his body or his speaking. Perhaps again it is his clothes or the way in which he is conducting himself that doesn't feel the same. And as they go and they hear and their ears are opening, they decide to extend a generosity to this stranger. We don't know if this is a test for them, all the times in which Jesus has told them to be generous and to show up into hard places and to welcome the stranger. But now perhaps they are recognizing that they are somehow hungry. He's started to make them aware of back in their fleshly bodies, and they have arrived at home. And I imagine this is a slow walk for Jesus as he's waiting to get the invitation. Has this ever happened to you, but you don't want to look too eager? So you're like, all right, see you later, bye. And you're like, and then it dawns on them that, oh, yeah. Oh, no, you should come in and eat with us. It's the slow walk, right? And it's then that they sit at the table with him. They invite him to sit down and eat. And surely we know what happens next, that as they are hungry and they're sitting there, that as he goes to get this bread, and he starts to break it. Think about all the times that they would have sat down at a meal together along the way. Maybe even they had heard about the Last Supper if they weren't there among the 12. That he breaks that bread, and it's like the scales then drop from their eyes. They didn't realize how hungry they were. And suddenly the bread is available to them, and he has offered it to them in this kind of big reveal. When we think about reveals these days, it's about, is it a boy, is it a girl? And in this moment, the big reveal of like, it's the Walking Dead Rabboni, it's like this great big moment in which they can suddenly see. And isn't it a crime, though, that as soon as they see what happens, poof, he's gone. Now, I agree with Ruth Smith, who in Bible study this week just said, I don't like it when this happens. I don't like it when Jesus disappears. Think about it. They've already had their lives ripped out from underneath them in the last 24 hours. And we can feel this resentment about the abandonment. Suddenly, he's here today and gone today. Is this how it works when we see Jesus? How does it work when we need so much more, when that healing comes with that hunger, and then the bread is before us, and then what is our job to do? Do we still take it and eat it once he's gone? Our eyes can play tricks on us. Our stomachs can grumble and ask for things that we may not be able to give it. The first day of April, I was going down to D.C. to go to a church meeting with Alan Story, who is a pastor who has preached for many, many years in Cape Town, South Africa. He'd been a conscientious objector when people were conscripted into the army in the face of apartheid. And so he has been preaching and teaching for a long time in relation to social and economic and racial justice. Back in Lent, when we had our candle here with the peace, hope, and justice candle with the barbed wire around it, it came out of the spirit of his community that is continuing to step up in the face of injustice. And so he was coming to speak at Mount Vernon United Methodist Church in D.C., and I wanted to go. And so I got up early, and I drove down, and I got on the metro, and I got there. And this is what Alan's story was talking about, this very kind of thing, about the people in our lives who recall for us, who bring in the remembering energy about what we are called to do in light of the risen Christ. It's not because we don't see crucified times in our reality. It's not because we don't see hurt and pain, but it's because we are living through distinct hurt, pain, and uncertainty that we needed to continue to remember and reclaim the joy that Jesus brings. And it requires our paying attention. He talked about all the people on our journey that can bring a baptismal energy back to us. And sometimes we don't realize it until it's already underway and it's already happened. And immediately, as I'm sitting in that chair learning about churchliness, I remember the metro ride to get there. And I'd been so tunneled in, I'd brought, I'm a good pastor, I had my book, and it was on interfaith ministry and how you can be a great pastor by reaching out to people across divides. And I'm sitting there, and maybe you've had this feeling where somebody comes and, also being a woman on the metro, I'm going to name that sometimes you think through things in a particular way. So I got in there on the end of the line, so I picked my seat where you're not too hemmed in, but you're not taking up too much space. So someone's not going to have to crawl over you, and you're not going to be in anybody's way, right? And I felt someone come and sit down next to me. And it's a vulnerable thing when you know there's a lot of empty seats in the train, and someone chooses to come and sit next to you. And not only do they come and sit next to you, but they get really interested in what you're reading. Like looking over your shoulder and starting to read what you're reading. And I caught myself, and I said, okay, how can I engage here in conversation in a way that might be helpful? Because there was something in my spirit that said, I think this person is hungry for something, and I don't know what it is, and it feels vulnerable to me, but I'm going to ask, how are things going this morning? So I did. Come to find out that this gentleman had avoided being arrested the night before. Yeah. And he showed me on his ankle was an ankle bracelet because he was on parole, having just come out of jail 5 years. And I didn't ask what it was that had detained him. But then he started talking about his journey. He talked about how his mom had died not that long ago. He grew up without a dad, and how things have been really tough for him along the road. And I didn't know, what was next in this conversation, but we just rode along. We were on this journey together, and I had a destination in mind, and I don't know that he necessarily did. I think he goes on the metro in order to not feel lonely. I think he needs to get somewhere, but he seeks out conversation and just wonders if there's others who can hear him out for where he is. And so at some point, he stood up, and he got lost in the sea of people, and just like Jesus, he disappeared. And I didn't know where he was going. But I got up, and I walked fast, and I looked around me to make sure that I could find out where it was I needed to be. But it wasn't until later that I realized that the scales had come down from my eyes. And while I was very high-minded and thinking about what's the next step in social justice ministry, let's go, the risen Christ showed me the nails in the hand, showed me the ankle bracelet. I was thinking about how we carry the scars of today and how it is that we interact with others, how it is that our society brings rehabilitation or restoration or not, and what you're doing right now when it comes to detaining people and the next steps on people's journey. I give thanks for that way in which Christ was on the road with me, whether or not I could see it then, but I can share it now. The resurrection. We are told about these stories of Pope Francis, one in our midst who time and time again chose to be, despite his power and his ability to isolate himself, perhaps at the Vatican, time and time again would go out and intentionally be with people on the road. Even such that in Holy Week, we have a picture of this, he would intentionally not just watch the feet of the cardinals, as some popes had done before him, but he would go among Muslims and people of other faiths. And then in recent years, he would go to the women's prison, and he would seek them out. And that's the picture you have. He's in a wheelchair in that lower left corner, but he's going along from each woman and taking the time to see them, and to see, I think, Christ in them as they might see Christ in him. And so I was thinking about this connection, even though some people might have complicated relationships with the Roman Catholic Church. I get that. But this overwhelming sense of when someone in power chooses not a route of aggression or retribution, but chooses a route of humility, and how that trueness in our studying of Jesus and his brokenness and his nailedness and his reality feels true to us. And it's in that true invitation that we hear to keep on showing up in ways that are significant for others, choosing vulnerable places. And when we find ourselves in vulnerable places that we did not choose, to take the time to ask the question, how are you today? A report came out from Gaza City in the overwhelming wellspring of people's grief that there's this Roman Catholic church in Gaza, rather small congregation. But it was reported that every night at 7 p.m., no matter how busy Pope Francis was, he always called. And he got on the phone and he would ask things like, do you have clean water? Was anyone injured today? Did you have something to eat? It was never a diplomatic call looking for some kind of publicity or press. It was to ask how his flock was, how his children was, how his family was. The spokesman said it was questions a father would ask. Now we know more than 300 Palestinians have sheltered at that church since the war in Gaza began in 2023. And there's been those that have been killed within the community. There's a tenderness there as grief is all around and death knocks. And the holy congregation has often been terrified. But you get a better sense about why they might say at the passing of Pope Francis, today we felt like we are orphans. Does it remind you of the passage when Jesus was there, but then Jesus disappeared? And where we might find hope from the hope that they found, because they had told him over again, and they had talked to him on Saturday, 2 days before he died. You know what Francis did? He told them he was praying for them, and he said he needed their prayers. This is the meal that comes at communion. We acknowledge that the ones who are in power, the ones who, like Jesus, are offering service unto the world, there is a need for the prayer that our churchliness, our body of Christ, would continue to do what we need to do to show up in the ways we need to show up in truth, and that each and every one of us needs prayers, the food of our journey, to keep on doing it. He had told them not to worry, that he would always be there for us. He was with us until his last breath. Friends, I like to think that Pope Francis was with them until his last breath, but that his breath continues in a spirit of resurrection. Isn't it a humble thing for the Pope not to die on Easter Sunday? That in his Christly humility, he gave Jesus that day and then was riding these beautiful coattails of the risen cloth, the resurrection, onto Easter Monday. And that we, in the spirit of that, can find hope, can find breath, that we indeed would be the hands and feet so that the world wouldn't think that the church has somehow disappeared in the face of the suffering we yet face in this country and around the globe. And so our commission is here to find reassurance, to remember the stories of Jesus here as Easter continues, and to remember that he is on the road with us, one metro stop at a time, unsuspecting steps when God is teaching, if and when we are ready to recognize and receive the lesson. This past week, I was at the first night of Courageous Conversations. We have been planning these interfaith talks for months and weeks. And what a gift it was to show up together in one room of people of different walks and to get into little circles and then bigger circle and talk about our common humanity and the injustice that we see and the hope that we have in community and connection. And so I put out before you that we're meeting again on Tuesday. These conversations are happening, this one at Beth Shalom, and then on May 6th, there will be another one over at St. John Baptist. So whether it's that kind of gathering and another one you're having at a coffee shop or with a neighbor or somewhere out there, to never underestimate when you sit with one another and you look each other in the eye and you dare to see godly work in action.